From getting $600,000 fines from the European Tour to Lee Westwood claiming that it's all PGA Tour's doing, this is the real reason why LIV Golf members could cop massive fines. I mean, they've already had to pay some hefty penalties to the DP World Tour. You know why? Well, it's because they joined the Breakaway League. Now, where the PGA Tour has straight up decided to suspend players from its membership, things are a bit more complicated with the European Tour, because initially, all they did was fine LIV members $147,000 and suspend them for a couple of events for breaching the conflicting tournament regulation. After all, the regulation states that you cannot take part in a competing event that takes place on the same territory as a DP World Tour. In fact, this happened right after the first LIV event in London, but while these golf rebels were able to get a stay from the court and continue to play on the tour regardless, things have now changed massively. Not only have these golfers lost the lawsuit, meaning they've had to pay the initial fine, but now they're facing another massive penalty that could go as high as $600,000. That's insane. In fact, if the European Tour does manage to impose these fines on the players, then this would literally be the biggest penalty in the history of the competition. Oh, and if you thought they're gonna stop here and let these guys back in, then think again, because the DP World Tour is planning to go even beyond this number in the future. No, seriously, if these golfers continue to be a part of the Breakaway Tour and don't return full-time to the European Tour, then this penalty will continue to increase until, well, they either quit LIV or the DP World Tour. And yeah, we all know which way it's gonna sway, right? After all, there's absolutely no universe in which any of these 17 people give in to the pressure and come back, especially considering how successful the Saudi-funded league has been lately. Oh, and I say 17, but this number has actually dropped down to 14 now. After all, 3 of these dudes, including Lee Westwood, Ian Poulter, and Sergio Garcia, have already quit the DP World Tour. In fact, they handed in their resignations the second it was revealed by the arbitration panel that, yeah, the tour can, in fact, sanction these guys and impose greater fines. Speaking of fines, though, there's a bit of a complicated issue with the payment of those as well. After all, LIV Golf has actually been paying it for some of its members. Wait a sec, though, why is the league doing that for these guys? Well, you see, some of the more high-profile DP World Tour members obviously knew that they'd be penalized to hell when they decided to leave. So they've got actual clauses in their LIV contracts that require Greg Norman to pay them. Oh, and yeah, that's been happening as well, because according to some reports, LIV Golf transferred a little over $1 million to the European Tour recently, covering the costs for 7 of its members. Also, just in case you're curious, 16 out of the 17 golfers have paid the initial $147,000 fine to the DP World Tour, and the one guy who hasn't, it's Sergio Garcia. Now, despite the fact that he's now resigned fully from the tour and won't be a part of its upcoming tournaments, including the Ryder Cup team, they're not gonna let him go scot-free. Instead, in a statement published recently, the DP World Tour said that it's gonna take appropriate action to go after the Spaniard because not only has he not paid the fine, but he hasn't given any indication that he's gonna pay it either. Of course, his leaving could make things a bit easier since he's not tied to them anymore, but it could still potentially turn into yet another legal battle between LIV and the European Tour. In fact, LIV Golf might have to bear the costs of these fines in other ways as well. I mean, first things first, if you're in Greg Norman's seat, you do not want your golfers to be distracted by these problems. Like, that's one of the reasons why LIV has offered so much legal support to its players in suits against the PGA and DP World Tours, right? Plus, that's also why they've offered to pay the fines for some of these members. The issue, however, goes beyond just that. Because, you see, a lot of these players, like Garcia and Westwood, have actually been super important parts of the EU Ryder Cup teams over the years. As a matter of fact, Garcia has arguably been the most important player for Team Europe over the years, since he's their highest points scorer and has the most wins in the competition's history. So he's obviously going to be upset about missing out, which might affect his game in the league. In fact, Team EU's captain, Luke Donald, also told the BBC that he's sad it had to come to this point. Because for him, Garcia, Poulter, and Westwood have given a lot to both the Ryder Cup and the European Tour over the years. That being said, these two aren't the only players to resign from the DP World Tour. In fact, we could see a mass exodus of players. I mean, we've already talked about how golfers would either have to keep paying these massive fines or just simply choose between LIV and the European Tour. And yeah, everyone knows they're gonna remain with the Saudi League, right? After all, that's where the money is for them. Here's where things get interesting though, because reports suggest that Garcia, Poulter, and Westwood's departures have actually encouraged some other players to take the plunge as well. Why? Well, for starters, the fines are apparently gonna go up to $1 million each, depending on the number of LIV events they play. Not to mention, by resigning from the DP World Tour, they could potentially avoid having to pay some of their older fines as well, including the $600,000 that's gonna be imposed soon. So in many ways, this is a no-brainer for members of the Breakaway League, and well, we could see the European Tour lose over a dozen of its best players within a couple of months. That being said, it's not like the players have any say in this matter. After all, they'd much rather operate between the two circuits at the same time. Lee Westwood, for instance, recently spoke with The Telegraph regarding the issue, and according to him, the players weren't told the exact repercussions when they initially signed with LIV Golf. Yep, he feels like these sanctions are unfair and that the tour should have informed them in a more clear way before imposing them. I mean, yeah, it's not like people like him can simply rip apart their multi-million-dollar deals with the Saudi League now, and for this reason, he said that people who say LIV players knew what would happen when they signed have no idea about the actual ground reality. Although he believes that we shouldn't be talking about all these consequences in the first place. Why? Well, he claims that since he's been allowed to be a part of the PGA Tour member without any problems, the same principle should also apply to LIV Golf. Because at the end of the day, that's just another tour, right? Oh, and yeah, he seemed pretty mad about the whole thing because for him, the only difference is that LIV is funded by the Saudis. Now, you might think that's a big enough reason to shun LIV Golf, but Westwood wants everyone to remember that the DP World Tour also encourages its golfers to play in the country and has a bunch of Saudi sponsors as well. So what's the main issue here? Well, LIV Golf members think that it's all PGA Tour's doing. Yep, it all comes back to the good old PGA Tour, doesn't it? But you see, the reason why there's never any objection over players crossing over between the PGA and European Tours is that they've got a strategic alliance with each other. Well, that's what they call it anyway, because Westwood actually says that the DP World Tour has jumped fully in bed with the PGA Tour. In fact, he thinks that the European Tour has now become a feeder tour for the PGA, which for him is a sad state of affairs. And to be fair, he's not wrong, because the top 10 players in Europe do have a free path over to the PGA Tour, and that's why he said that he doesn't want to be a part of a regime like that. The 50-year-old also added that he's always played on the Asian Tour and got released without any issues there, so the moment anyone tries to restrict his freedom to play, he's out. Although Westwood is also sad about having to leave his European Tour and Ryder Cup legacy behind. Regardless, he feels like he's given more than enough to both these entities over the years, and now all he wants is to move on and not have the cloud of tour punishments hanging over him. And there you have it, from the PGA Tour pulling the strings and controlling the DP World Tour to getting $600,000 fines from the European Tour, that was the real reason why LIV Golf members could cop massive fines.